This is not a story of monsters. It's a story of guilt, faith, and vengeance. A tale written in ashes and remembered in blood. The wind moaned through the crooked trees of Raven's Hollow as dusk crept over the valley. The villagers hurried to shutter their windows, whispering old prayers that had not been spoken for generations. It was the eve of the 100th year, the night of the blood moon. For centuries, stories had passed from elder to child. When the moon bleeds, the earth exhales the dead. Most treated it as a myth, a superstition buried beneath time. But the oldest among them remembered the last rising, when the church bell tolled 13 times, though no one had touched the rope, and the ground near the old cemetery swelled as if breathing. In the tavern, candles flickered weakly against the draught. The barkeep crossed himself again and again, his eyes darting toward the window where the first hints of crimson light painted the clouds. A young boy named Elias, barely 17, laughed nervously at the old tales. Yet even he could not explain why the animals had fled the woods or why the crows circled in perfect silence above the chapel spire. Outside, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of rain and iron. A distant thunder rolled, but there were no clouds, only the slow rise of a moon that seemed to drip like blood onto the world below. From the cemetery hill came the echo of shifting earth, a faint, rhythmic sound, like something knocking from beneath. The elders gathered before the chapel doors, holding torches that sputtered and hissed. "It begins again," whispered one, his voice trembling. And as the blood moon climbed fully into the sky, the ancient runes carved into the church walls began to glow faintly, red, like open wounds. Raven's Hollow had been warned. The dead were listening. At the far edge of Raven's Hollow, beyond the last thatched cottages and the skeletal apple orchards, lay a forest no one dared to enter. Locals called it the Blackwood, a place where even sunlight seemed to die. Within that forest, hidden beneath centuries of creeping ivy and rotted leaves, was the forgotten cemetery, the first burial ground of the kingdom. Long ago, when Raven's Hollow was little more than a fortress village, plague and witchcraft consumed its people. The priests of the old faith sealed the cemetery with sacred sigils and molten iron, forbidding anyone from returning. It was said that those buried there were not merely dead, they were condemned. Their souls, tainted by the sins of blood rituals and forbidden pacts, could never rest. But time erases memory, and greed always finds a way to dig. In recent years, woodcutters spoke of strange bones unearthed by the riverbank, etched with markings no one could read. Hunters claimed to hear chanting at night, though no one was there. And sometimes, deep in the woods, they found footprints, human, but wrong. Too deep, too cold, leading nowhere. One stormy evening, a traveler seeking shelter wandered into the forest. He followed the sound of bells, soft, distant, and sorrowful, until he reached a clearing swallowed by fog. There, half buried under moss and stone, stood the iron gates of the old cemetery. They were twisted open. Inside, rows of broken headstones leaned like rotten teeth. The air was heavy with decay and something else, the faint, pulsing hum of life where there should be none. Beneath the earth, something moved. The traveler turned to flee, but the gate behind him slammed shut on its own. The next morning, villagers found his horse at the forest edge, but never the man. For months, Elias had roamed the northern mountains, chasing wolves and surviving on snow and silence. He left Raven's Hollow in search of fur and fortune, but as he returned, the forest felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. Not a single bird called. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. As his boots sank into the muddy trail, he saw the village smoke rising faintly in the distance. Yet, when he arrived, the streets were deserted. Doors hung open. Tables were set, food half-eaten, as if everyone had simply vanished mid-breath. The only sound was the slow creak of the chapel's bell swaying in the wind, though no one was there to pull the rope. "Mother," he called, stepping into his childhood home. Dust floated like ash in the fading light. His mother's rosary lay on the table, her chair overturned. A streak of blood trailed across the floor, leading outside. As night fell, Elias lit his torch and made his way toward the cemetery hill, where the fog thickened and the smell of rot grew stronger. He found footprints, barefoot, uneven, pressed deep into the wet soil. They led to the old churchyard gate. Inside, Something moved, a shadow slinking between the graves. Elias aimed his bow, but froze. The figure stepped into the torchlight. It was his father, pale, hollow-eyed, and smiling. Before Elias could speak, his father's jaw cracked open with a sound like splintering wood. From his throat came a voice that was not human. "Welcome home, my son. The moon remembers you." The torch flickered and went out. The next night, the villagers who remained gathered inside their homes, bolting doors and nailing windows shut. But nothing could block out the light that bled across the heavens. The moon rose, swollen, red, alive. Its glow drenched Raven's Hollow in a sickly crimson haze. The river reflected it like blood. Chickens screamed in their coops, dogs clawed at doors, and every clock in the village stopped at the same moment, midnight. The air itself changed. It grew heavy, thick with the stench of copper and burning oil. People said they could taste the metal on their tongues, feel the pulse of something ancient stirring beneath the soil. Children woke screaming, claiming they saw faces in the sky, hollow-eyed figures reaching down through the red light. An old woman, blind for years, suddenly began to weep. "They're coming," she whispered. "They've found the door again." Then, the earth shuddered. A low hum rose from beneath the ground, the sound of 1,000 whispers murmuring through the dirt. The candles in the church windows blew out one by one, as though smothered by unseen hands. And far above, the moon seemed to breathe. Clouds pulsed around it, spreading veins of dark light across the sky. The blood moon had awakened, and Raven's Hollow was no longer part of the living world. From the cemetery hill came the first scream, a cry so human, yet so hollow it seemed to echo from both the past and the grave. The elders fell to their knees, praying to gods that had long abandoned them. But the prayers were drowned beneath the rising chorus of the dead. The sky was bleeding, and the night had only begun. The first sound came just before dawn, a low, rhythmic thud, 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 echoing across the misty hills of Raven's Hollow. Elias thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then the ground beneath him trembled, as if something vast and restless moved below. From the old cemetery, fog poured like smoke from a wound. Graves began to shift. The earth heaved and cracked, splitting open to reveal bones slick with soil. A hand, pale, swollen, and clawed, burst from the dirt, grasping at the air. Then another. Within minutes, the ground writhed with movement. The dead were waking. Elias ran toward the chapel, his torch flickering wildly. In the graveyard, familiar faces emerged, neighbors, friends, even the blacksmith who died months ago. But their eyes, they were wrong. Clouded, red-rimmed, glowing faintly under the crimson sky. Some stumbled blindly, others crawled, twitching like broken puppets. The sound of cracking bones mixed with the wet drag of flesh. The air filled with whispers, voices overlapping, repeating one phrase again and again. "The moon remembers, the moon remembers." Elias tried to pray, but the words caught in his throat. From the fog, a woman appeared, her white dress torn, her skin gray as ash. He knew her. It was Clara, the girl he once loved, buried 2 winters ago. She smiled, but her mouth didn't move. The smile belonged to something inside her. "Elias," she said softly, "you came back, just like we did." The torch fell from his hand, and when the light went out, 100 red eyes opened in the darkness. The first awakening had begun. The first sound came just before dawn, a low, rhythmic thud, 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 echoing across the misty hills of Raven's Hollow. Elias thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then the ground beneath him trembled, as if something vast and restless moved below. From the old cemetery, fog poured like smoke from a wound. Graves began to shift. The earth heaved and cracked, splitting open to reveal bones slick with soil. A hand, pale, swollen, and clawed, burst from the dirt, grasping at the air. Then another. Within minutes, the ground writhed with movement. The dead were waking. Elias ran toward the chapel, his torch flickering wildly. In the graveyard, familiar faces emerged, neighbors, friends, even the blacksmith who died months ago. But their eyes, they were wrong. Clouded, red-rimmed, glowing faintly under the crimson sky. Some stumbled blindly, others crawled, twitching like broken puppets. The sound of cracking bones mixed with the wet drag of flesh. The air filled with whispers, voices overlapping, repeating one phrase again and again. The moon remembers, the moon remembers. Elias tried to pray, but the words caught in his throat. From the fog, a woman appeared, her white dress torn, her skin gray as ash. He knew her. It was Clara, the girl he once loved, buried 2 winters ago. She smiled, but her mouth didn't move. The smile belonged to something inside her. "Elias," she said softly, "you came back, just like we did." The torch fell from his hand, and when the light went out, 100 red eyes opened in the darkness. The first awakening had begun. Night, Raven's Hollow was drowned in silence. Every door was locked, every window boarded shut. Yet through the stillness came whispers, faint at first, then growing louder, as though the air itself had learned to speak. Elias sat by the fire in an abandoned cottage, clutching his father's old dagger. Sleep had become impossible. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard it, his mother's voice. By the 3rd night, the old chapel stood like a skeleton on the hill. Its steeple cracked, its bell rusted in place. The villagers once called it the House of Light. Now, it was only called the Church of Ash. Elias approached cautiously, his torch barely burning. The great oak doors were splintered, claw marks gouged deep into the wood. Inside, the pews were overturned, the air thick with soot and something sweeter, the stench of rot disguised as incense. The altar had been desecrated. The priest's body hung from the crucifix, his eyes gone, his skin blackened as if burned. Yet his lips moved. Slowly, silently. Elias stepped closer and heard it, the faint murmur of prayer, rasping through a throat that should no longer breathe. "Deliver us from the moon's shadow." The priest whispered, blood bubbling between his teeth. Behind him, the stained glass windows glowed faintly red, as though light was shining from outside the world. Figures moved behind the glass, dark silhouettes that crawled and twisted as if alive. Elias backed away, crossing himself. Then, the church bell rang once. Loud, clear, impossible. The sound shook the building. Ash rained from the rafters. From beneath the altar came a hollow pounding, something trapped below. Elias tore open the floorboards and froze. Beneath the chapel, a pit yawned open, filled with bones, skulls, and charred crucifixes. And among them, something breathing. He stumbled back as a skeletal hand reached upward, clutching the priest's ankle. The corpse screamed, a long, piercing cry that echoed through the valley. Then, silence. Outside, the blood moon flared brighter, bathing the church in red light. The prayers had stopped, but the voices below had only just begun. The gravedigger of Raven's Hollow was a man named Garrick Holt, old, bent, and silent as the earth he buried others in. For decades, he dug graves by moonlight, muttering prayers no one recognized. The villagers feared him but needed him. He was the only one who never wept at funerals. One night, Elias found Garrick sitting beside an open grave, staring into it as though expecting it to answer. His eyes were hollow, ringed with red, his hands trembling. In his lap lay an old leather satchel, sealed shut with wax and rope. When Elias demanded to know what he'd done, Garrick whispered, "I broke the seal." Through cracked lips, he confessed. Years ago, a merchant had paid him in gold to dig beneath the oldest tombs, to find relics buried before the first chapel was built. But what Garrick found was no relic. Beneath the soil lay a door of black stone, carved with symbols that pulsed faintly even in darkness. He opened it. That night, the wind howled through the cemetery like laughter. The grave shifted. He saw faces pressing up from the dirt, eyes opening where none should be. From that day forward, he heard them whisper his name each time the moon rose. Elias stared at him, horrified, but Garrick only smiled, tears carving lines through the dirt on his face. "They told me this would happen," he rasped. "They said when the blood moon returns, my debt will be collected." As dawn approached, Garrick took his shovel and walked back into the fog. The next day, only his hat was found, resting on the gate of the old graveyard. The graves beneath it were no longer still. Among the relics hidden in the ruins of the old chapel, Elias discovered something strange, a candle unlike any other. Its wax was dark, red as rusted blood, and at its base was an engraving. "In blood it burns, in death it sleeps." He brought it to the last surviving monk of Raven's Hollow, Brother Alden, a frail man half-mad from years of isolation. When he saw the candle, Alden screamed. "You should never have touched it," he cried. That candle was forged from the blood of the martyred priests, the ones who sealed the first curse. Legend said that when lit, the blood candle could silence the voices of the restless dead, but only if the flame was kindled by a living soul willing to sacrifice their own. Otherwise, it would awaken every corpse it had ever silenced. That night, desperate for hope, Elias struck the flint. The wick caught instantly, and the candle's flame rose high, twisting and writhing like something alive. The red glow filled the chapel, washing over every shadow. For a moment, the whispers stopped. The air grew still. It felt as though the world had exhaled. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate knocking, from beneath the floor. The flame flickered violently, dripping molten wax that hissed as it touched the ground. Brother Alden fell to his knees, his eyes wide with terror. "You've called them," he whispered. "You've called them all." The walls began to bleed. The candle's light grew brighter until it burned white, and then, just as suddenly, went out. Darkness swallowed the chapel, and in that darkness, something breathed. Midnight fell like a blade over Raven's Hollow. The streets were empty, shrouded in fog, yet somewhere in the distance, a sound began, a faint rhythm, like feet dragging on stone. The villagers who still lived pressed their faces to their windows, hearts pounding. Out of the mist, they appeared, hundreds of figures, moving in a slow, silent march. Men, women, children, all dressed in the tattered rags they had been buried in. Their eyes glowed faintly red beneath the blood moon. They walked shoulder to shoulder, their heads bowed, clutching candles made of bone. They were not attacking. They were mourning. Each step echoed with a hollow thud, each breath a whisper from the grave. As they passed, doors creaked open on their own, and one by one, the candles inside every home went out. Elias stood at the crossroads, watching as the procession wound its way toward the chapel hill. The dead did not look at him until he spoke. "Why are you here?" he shouted. Every head turned at once. Hundreds of lifeless faces, all staring with the same hollow gaze. Then, in one voice, they answered, to finish the prayer that death forgot. They reached the churchyard gates and began to hum, a low, unholy sound that grew louder with each verse. The air pulsed with red light. The earth split open, revealing the charred remains of the priest, and behind him, something vast and shadowed rose from the pit. The procession knelt as one, their chanting merging into a single cry that shook the night. The moon remembers, and above them, the blood moon pulsed brighter, as though it too was listening. Centuries before Raven's Hollow fell to ruin, there lived a healer, Seraphine of Thornvale. She was gentle, kind, and gifted beyond reason. Her touch could mend wounds, her herbs could cure plagues, and her prayers seemed to move heaven itself. But power, in the hands of a woman, frightened the men of faith. When the crops failed and children died, the priests accused her of witchcraft. They said she had consorted with the devil, that her healing was blasphemy. The villagers, terrified and desperate, turned against her. On the night of the first blood moon, they dragged her to the edge of the forest, the same ground that would later become the Raven's Hollow Cemetery. There, they built a pyre and bound her to it. As the flames rose, Seraphine did not scream. She only whispered words that chilled every soul who heard them. "If my light burns in vain, then your darkness shall never die." Her ashes scattered into the wind, carried through the woods and over the graves of the guilty. That night, red rain fell, and by dawn, every priest who condemned her was dead, their bodies pale and hollow as wax. The curse was born that night, the blood moon's curse. And now, as Elias watched the dead rise under the crimson sky, he understood. Every shadow, every whisper, every stirring grave, all of it was her vengeance, echoing through the centuries. The priestess had been betrayed once. She would not rest until the whole village paid the price. Behind the ruins of the chapel lay an old stone well, so ancient that moss had grown thick enough to hide the carvings around its rim. The villagers once called it the Mirror Well because its surface reflected not the sky, but whatever it wished to show. Elias found it on a night when the blood moon hung lowest, its light rippling over the water like liquid fire. He peered into the well and saw not his reflection, but his mother's face. She smiled softly, eyes wet with tears. "Come closer," she whispered. The voice was wrong. Too smooth. Too calm. But Elias couldn't look away. Images began to flicker beneath the surface. The dead villagers, the gravedigger, even the priestess Seraphine. They floated in darkness, their mouths moving in silent unison. Then he saw himself, pale, lifeless, lying among them. His own corpse. He stumbled back, gasping, but the water rippled again and formed words across its surface. "The moon remembers you." A hand burst from the water, gripping his wrist. Its touch was colder than death. He screamed and slashed with his dagger, severing it. But when he looked down, no wound, no water, no blood. The well was calm again, still as glass. Behind him, whispers rose, the same voices he had heard in the woods. They were chanting, their tone desperate, pleading. Elias turned back once more. The reflection now showed Raven's Hollow burning. And within the flames stood a figure, Seraphine, the priestess, her eyes glowing red. The mirror well was no longer showing him the past. It was showing him the end. When Elias realized the curse could not be undone, he made a choice. If he couldn't save Raven's Hollow, he would destroy it. He gathered the last survivors, farmers, mothers, a wounded knight, and led them to the church hill. The blood moon loomed above, vast and bleeding, casting shadows that moved even when no one did. "The fire will cleanse it," Elias said. But even he didn't believe it. They drenched the village in oil, torches shaking in their trembling hands. One by one, the homes that once held laughter went up in flames. Screams filled the night, some human, some not. From the smoke came the dead, their flesh blistering, their eyes burning brighter as the fire fed on them. The more the flames spread, the stronger they grew. "Fire doesn't kill the dead." The priestess's voice echoed through the wind. "It only reminds them how they died." The chapel's bell rang once more, this time cracking in half as the tower collapsed. Elias fell to his knees, surrounded by ash and cinders, watching as the blood moon reflected in every burning window like 1,000 staring eyes. He looked at his torch, the last flame that still obeyed him, and whispered, "Then let me burn too." And as he cast it into the heart of the fire, Raven's Hollow vanished in a storm of embers. But the dead didn't scream. They sang. The blood moon began to fade. Its crimson light dimmed, swallowed by a shadow that slowly crept across its surface. The eclipse had begun. Elias stood alone in the ruins of the chapel, clutching the blood candle. The flame burned weakly, feeding on the last drops of his own blood. His body trembled, his skin pale, but his eyes were steady. He knew what had to be done. Brother Alden's voice echoed in his mind. A living soul must light it with their dying breath. As the shadow consumed the moon, Elias knelt before the altar and drove the dagger into his palm. Blood poured down the candle, flaring its flame to life. For a moment, the whispers stopped. The fog lifted. Even the dead grew still. The air shimmered, a pulse of light spreading from the chapel outward, washing over the graves, the streets, the forest. One by one, the walking corpses fell silent, collapsing like empty shells. The blood moon flickered, struggling against the darkness that sought to consume it. Elias smiled weakly. "For you, Mother," he whispered. "For all of them." He closed his eyes, the candle burning brighter than the moon itself. And then, with one final breath, he whispered a prayer that no one would ever hear. The eclipse completed, and Raven's Hollow was silent. Morning should have broken hours ago. Yet the sky above Raven's Hollow remained gray, a lifeless half-light between night and day. The fires were gone. The air was cold. The moon had vanished. Where once stood a village now lay only ash and broken stone. The wind carried faint whispers, but they were not of pain. They were of memory. Travelers who came through years later found no trace of life, yet claimed to hear church bells tolling beneath the fog. Some swore they saw figures walking among the ruins at dusk, not monstrous, but peaceful, as though repeating a life they no longer remembered. At the center of it all stood the remains of the chapel. On the altar, untouched by time, the blood candle still stood, its wick long extinguished, yet warm to the touch. And sometimes, when the clouds part just enough, the moon can still be seen, not red, but scarred, marked forever by the curse of Raven's Hollow. They say if you stand in that valley under a full moon and whisper your name, you'll hear a faint echo call it back. The moon remembers. It always does. If you enjoyed this story, then don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and press the bell icon, so when I bring the next story, you'll be the first to hear it. I'm your friend, and I'll always be with you. Until the next story, goodbye.